The following episode is brought to you by FFBCast. Stay tuned for your very own custom podcast, and don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel.
You are listening to the Fantasy 2018-1 podcast brought to you by FFBCast. I'm your host, Dave Caban, and this is the Week 11 episode. Today we'll be overviewing upcoming matchups, reviewing the league's points leaders, and taking a look at the playoff picture. Welcome into the podcast. We have a lot of exciting topics to cover in what is a very compelling, interesting, and fun league. But before we bring on today's special guest, let's quickly run through the league's current standings. As a reminder, 4 teams from each division make the playoffs, so there's still a number of teams in the hunt. In the East, El Baracho sits atop the standings with a record of 7-3. Project Freelancer and the 5 are close behind with 6-4 records. The Milwaukee Marvels and Breaking Out will be vying for the East's 4th playoff spot with records of 4-6. In the West, we have the Monster and Cowboys sitting at 7-3, Redemption at 6-4, and the Champs at 5-5. With a record of 4-6, Shoebox will need to close out the season with a strong stretch of games and likely a couple of Champs losses to make the playoffs. It's also worth noting that we have now seen winning streaks from the 5 and Redemption of 4 games, stringing together a solid stretch here, going 4-0 over the last 4 weeks. So those are the standings. Let's take a closer look at the matchups from the past weekend, and to help us out, we have a special guest. I'd like to welcome into the show a good friend of mine, a take connoisseur and the most well-branded individual in all of fantasy football, one half of the Living the Stream podcast, a man with a tremendous head of hair, and that, of course, is Denny Carter. What's going on, Denny?
Not much, Dave. I do this for the hair compliment, so that means a lot.
Well, there's one thing that you can always rely on, right? A fantasy win is not something that will be there all the time, but with Denny Carter, you always know that the hair day will be there.
Yes, some days are better than others, but I appreciate it, and I'm excited to do this show.
Yeah, so let's get going right into the action here. So the Week 10 matchups, they were all pretty close, but Redemption stuck it to Upsetter, winning by a score of 133.4 to 99.3. That was despite just an 18-point week from Patrick Mahomes. They did get 24 from Alvin Kamara, 34 from Christian McCaffrey, and Zach Ertz was a hero with 33.5 points. Now, Upsetter on the other side, they did get a nice game out of Eli Manning, 21 points. Brandon Cooks added 22, Edelman 15, but clearly this is a team that is sorely missing Le'Veon Bell, and the holdout has placed them at a huge disadvantage this season. So it's tough to get a near goose egg from Ben Watson as well, with Rudolph on the bye. What do you think were the key aspects of this matchup, Denny?
Well, I guess with the Mahomes 18-pointer, you've grown to expect a lot more out of him. So to get by with sort of an average output, I'm not sure where he finished on the week. I'm guessing it's outside the top 12. But I feel like you should feel pretty good about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a huge way to win. Anytime you can get by when the players that are normally your mega producers aren't performing at their normal level, that's a huge thing for your team. And Redemption, this is a good point in the season for them to kind of pick up some momentum. I think, especially if you look at that roster, they also had Adam Thielen on a bye week, so they weren't even at full strength. In another high-scoring game, the 5 edged out El Baracho by a score of 126.7 to 116.2. The 5 were led by a monster day from Nick Chubb, who can perhaps propel this team into the top of the standings. So before we continue breaking down this matchup, Denny, do you think that this is the Nick Chubb we're going to see here on out for the rest of the season?
Well, yeah, I don't know how many 90-yard runs we're going to get, but I do think that it's pretty clear that the new coaching staff wants to feed him the ball whenever possible, and that might not be possible in bad game scripts, and if and when the Browns fall behind in the coming weeks, but I think that as long as game script is neutral or definitely positive, he's going to get a lot of opportunity, and obviously we see that he can do a lot with a little. So that's awesome for whoever has Chubb rostered.
Yeah, so the 5, I think that they're going to be at a good spot. Chubb was a very explosive player in college. It's translating at the next level. He was the type of guy identified before the season started as a league winner. And who knows? They also have Michael Thomas, who added 23 over the weekend. Tyler Lockett contributed 17. Carson Wentz at quarterback. Perhaps this is a team that Chubb can take to glory. Now, El Baracho, a strong team in this league, again, finished with 116.2 points. They have to be upset, though, that they sat Matt Breida, who scored 27, and Allen Robinson, who had 28. They did get 29 from Drew Brees, 20 from Devontae Adams, but only 12 from Saquon Barkley, 6.6 from Mike Evans, and 3.2 from Jarvis Landry. So I think that's a tough loss for them, Denny.
It is. Being able to roll out Landry, Evans, and Barkley, that sounds good to me. I mean, the process is definitely there. You're not going to get many weeks where all three of those guys tank, and that's what you got here. Now with Robinson, I think that we were clued in a little bit on Saturday and then Sunday morning when it was clear that the Lions secondary was really banged up and they were going to miss key starters. And so that, to me, that said, give him the edge over other receiver options that you might have been on the fence about. I'm not saying that you definitely bench Mike Evans for Allen Robinson. I wouldn't have done that. But that sort of thing is a tip off oftentimes, the health of a secondary.
Absolutely. And I think it should be very encouraging for that team that they are going to have some difficult lineup decisions to make going forward, but it is because they have a fair amount of depth. In the East Division action, the Milwaukee Marvels added to the Profits' 4-game skid with an 104-81.5 point victory. They were led by 20 points from Juju Smith-Schuster, 24 from Mark Ingram, 18 from Jared Goff, and they get the win despite a negative 2-point performance from kicker Cody Parkey. Of course, DeAndre Hopkins was on a bye. As a man that is a kicker connoisseur, the negative 2-point day, how disappointing is that when that happens, Denny?
Yeah, I mean that's a total gut punch, right? I mean, to get negative points out of your kicker. Everybody hates kickers, but especially when they score in the negative. And I actually was unaware until the other day because I didn't watch that game. Yep. But I was unaware that he hit the goalpost 4 times. He hit the uprights 4 times. It was by the 4th time, the camera panned to Parkey, and he's laughing. He's actually laughing. He's saying to himself, "This is funny. I'm not even mad anymore."
Right. Well, if you were a person that believed that the universe worked in odd ways or in ways that were aimed at ruining people's day, I think that would be a great example. The other interesting thing about this matchup is that Parkey contributed negative 2 points. The Dolphins defense only added 3 points, so they only got 1 point from those two positions, whereas the Prophet actually got 18. And normally that DST kicker delta is huge, but this was a case where it wasn't.
Yeah. Again, I think you should feel pretty good if you can get out of the week with a win when your defense and kicker combined. What was it for 1 point? I mean, that's that. I know that the point total wasn't pretty, but a win is a win.
Absolutely. So Profit with 81.5 points. They got a pretty solid performance from Baker Mayfield with 24 points. Todd Gurley, 23.5, but it does not help when you have Traquan Smith in the lineup putting up a 0 spot. Chris Conley adding almost 3 points. Doug Baldwin, it's been a down season. Sony Michel, just 3 points. When you look at a roster like this, Denny, do you think this roster has a chance to recover? Or how would you be feeling about this team at this point in the season? Limited production being given them by Rob Gronkowski.
Right. I mean, the Gronk piece of the puzzle really hurts, and you're not the only one. But I think you have a mix of players who are volatile, like Traquan Smith, who he will have big weeks, but he'll also have weeks that are at zero or close to zero, and you mix that with other guys who don't really have a big ceiling, guys like Baldwin, say. And I think that's a tough combo to get, consistent production out of.
Yeah, absolutely. So a tough week for the Prophet, unfortunately, but hey, things can always turn around in this league. Moving along, another game, not quite as close as some of the others. The Cowboys winning 110 against Shoebox, who put up 94.9 points. The Cowboys led by a huge day from Ezekiel Elliott, 33.7 points, 28 from Melvin Gordon. I think that's about as good of a running back duo as you're going to be able to get.
I mean, that I'm blushing just looking at that combo. I don't know. I don't even know how that happened, but it's amazing. It's a great luxury to have that sort of combined floor from those running backs.
Absolutely. And Stephon Diggs was on the bench as well. So Shoebox had to be happy when they saw that. However, though, they kind of suffered at the running back position this week. Just 7.8 points from Tevin Coleman. James White, who has been truly fantastic this season with just 5.6, very easily his worst game of the season, I would say. They did get 29 points from Tyreek Hill. However, Chris Hogan contributes a 0. Deshaun Jackson did not have a good game as well. I think that this running back production, though, it was just a really down week for them, and that should recover.
Yeah, I mean, Tevin Coleman might have won your week the week before, and was not in a position to get a lot of touches in this one as the Falcons fell behind early, and that's how it goes sometimes with running backs.
Yeah, and I think, though, the other interesting thing, too, is that they actually got 14 points from the Steelers when they were playing the Panthers, which was a good DST total, but not enough to get them over the hump and take that game down. Breaking Out beat the Freelancers 114-86, led by one of Russell Wilson's best games of the season. Finally gets solid rushing production with 92 yards. They also had Antonio Brown at 21.6, but I think they're going to leave this week a little bit disappointed as Cooper Kupp, one of their key receivers, goes down for the season. How big of a blow is that, Denny?
Yeah, that hurts. I think if you have any piece of that Rams offense, I mean, other pieces are more important, but it hurts to lose someone who's often attached to such high scoring games. If you have Robert Woods or Kupp or Brandon Cooks, you're not getting 20, 25 PPR points every week, but you are benefiting when the Rams offense is really clicking. So that definitely does hurt.
So Project Freelancer goes down to Breaking Out. Again, the score was 114-86 for Project Freelancer. Julio Jones put up 20 points. They got 17 from Matt Ryan. Bit of a disappointing day, though, as Travis Kelce does not get to 8 points. They get just 4.8 from Kenyon Drake, and AJ Green was hurt and could not play. But I do think there might be some encouraging signs for this team as you review the roster.
I like the roster. I mean, just face value. I think if Green gets healthy, Kelce is not going to have down weeks very often in that offense and the way it produces. I think it has a lot of upside. This is a roster that really caught my attention when I was reviewing the league.
Yeah, I think the same thing for me too is one of those where this kind of feels more like an aberration type of week. And, every once in a while, it's okay to have a week like this. You have a number of players having bad games at once. That's better than, kind of getting those spread out, I think, in my opinion.
Sure. Oh yeah. Take all the bad stuff at once. Sure.
Absolutely. In a closer game, but a pretty low-scoring match, you have the Monster edging out the champs 89 to 80.2. The Monster, a team that I feel has a pretty well-rounded roster, gets a very down game from Fitzmagic, a down game from James Conner, and a down game from Adrian Peterson. Really, the only high point performance going over 20 was Odell Beckham with 21.3, but they still managed to take the win, and they had Leonard Fournette on the bench.
Oh man, yeah, you got to play Fournette. I feel like, with Fournette healthy, finally, the Jaguars are determined to use him to really feed him, no matter what's happening. And so it feels like he's a plug and play from here on out. And the Fitzpatrick thing is frustrating, but I think that he was still a must start. In a 12-team league, the matchup was pretty good, and he did throw what he threw for 400 yards. So if you don't get a touchdown out of 400 yards, that's variance or bad luck.
Absolutely. And it's encouraging too, because you still get those 400 yards. So it's not, like you said, going to be an often occurring thing that you get the 400 yards from your quarterback and that point total. So, you can probably keep starting Fitzpatrick. And then the other encouraging thing too is you now know, if you're this team, that you get to use James Conner week in and week out. The champs, however, a disappointing week for them. A 0 spot for Mike Williams. They also have the other Chargers receiver in Tyrell Williams with just 6.6 points. They got 33.8 from David Johnson, who I think is going to be an RB1 moving forward. But other than that, not a whole lot of production to speak of.
Yeah, I love. Yeah, I mean, David Johnson is clearly being used in a much different way now that Byron Leftwich has taken over. He's a. It feels weird to say that he's a league winner, but what I mean is, if you held on to him, if you held tight, that he could really carry you from here on out.
Absolutely. Now, what do you think about the decision to leave Kenny Golladay on the bench, rolling with David Moore, Mike Williams, and Tyrell Williams?
I think that we're going to see that the target share is much more condensed now that Golden Tate is out of Detroit, and that means that Marvin Jones and Golladay are going to see, I think more consistent targets for one, and also Marvin Jones is banged up. I didn't see an injury report today, but if he's banged up and misses this week, you got to find a way to get Golladay in your lineup.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that especially on this team, he should be staying in there. So they're probably kind of kicking themselves for putting Golladay on the bench. Granted, there had been a couple of down weeks before there.
You're listening to an FFBcast podcast. For more custom content, visit us online at FFBcast.com.
So we talked about these standings to open the show, but I think it's also important to look at total points. Redemption out in head, by and large in control of points with 1,283. The Monster is in second place with 1,161, and El Baracho is at 1,150. The average points total in the league is 1,067, which, breaking out Project Freelancer and the Cowboys, sit above. Mm-hmm. And last place is Upsetter, who, as we mentioned before, was done no favors by Le'Veon Bell. And I would just like to say to this team and this owner that that's just an unfortunate situation. Don't let those points keep you down, because there are so many fantasy gamers throughout the world that are feeling your pain.
For sure. I mean, taking Bell in the top two made all the sense in the world. I did it in a couple leagues. Well, in one league that I care about a lot, and it hurt a lot. So I feel that pain.
Yeah, and I will say, I did the same thing, because at RotoViz, I had him projected as the highest scoring player in the league by a significant margin. And given the success of James Conner, we can only imagine, if there really is a talent gap between those two, how well Le'Veon Bell would have done. So, Denny, I want to talk about the playoff picture and get your expectations, but before we do, let's take a look at the players that are available and could make a difference down the stretch. Do you have any names in looking through the free agent pool that stood out to you?
One guy that jumped out, and he's not startable right now, but he could be very startable and very usable. Jamal Williams from Green Bay. He's one Aaron Jones injury away from presumably getting a full workload for behind Aaron Rodgers, and that's never a bad thing. He excelled in his very limited, I think, two game opportunity as the starter for Green Bay last year. So I would find a way to stash him for the stretch run.
Absolutely.
Another guy, Ricky Seals-Jones, tight end from Arizona. He's running a lot of routes, and that's what we look for with tight ends. Now, the guy throwing him the ball and the production of the offense leaves a little bit to be desired, obviously. But we can't be too picky with the tight end position because it tends to be a dumpster fire. So I would consider him if you're getting kind of spotty tight end production from your tight end.
Absolutely. I think that makes sense. Now, I have an interesting name here for you. You can tell me what you think. Joe Flacco, obviously not the highest scoring fantasy quarterback out there. But if you go in and you look at some advanced strength of schedule metrics, you'll see that he has one of the easiest schedules of all passers. We know that the Ravens are constantly airing it out, so he does have some decent opportunity. I think, too, when you look at the quarterbacks in this league, he is the type of guy that could help you out if you find yourself in trouble.
Oh yeah, the schedule is fantastic, and until the Ravens ran into a really rough stretch of defenses lately, they were a highly productive offense.
Yeah, I have to agree with that. Another name that stood out to me, Dante Moncrief. I've been pounding the drum for Moncrief now all season. He is the highest targeted player in his offense. He's playing the number one. The points have actually been there a couple of weeks, and if you look at some other things like his expected points per game and other things you might look at when looking at some of the advanced stats, there has been a lot of opportunity for Moncrief.
Yes, and we saw that he is leading the team in air yards, which is a good indication of potential production. And hopefully, if you can pick up Moncrief and are able to start him, hopefully the Jaguars continue to fall behind and are forced to throw.
Which we've seen them need to rely on time in and time again. And the final name I want to throw out there is Willie Snead, Joe Flacco's second option in the passing game. Snead is seeing a lot of targets every week. He's available in a lot of leagues, available in this league. And if you're looking for a guy that can very realistically get 8 or 9 targets a game, which is something very hard to come by, you have Snead, who is going to also enjoy that soft schedule that Flacco plays.
Absolutely.
So let's turn our attention now to the playoff picture in this league. Denny, unfortunately, I think we do have some teams that are out of contention. The Prophet and Upsetter are both sitting at 2-8. It's going to be tough for them to make this happen. Now, the Prophet does play Upsetter in the upcoming week, so that could be an easy matchup, presumably, for those teams to win. And I think that they, at the very least, need to win out the rest of the season. Now, the interesting thing for the Prophet is that they will also play the Milwaukee Marvels, who are in their division, who they could pass if they beat the Marvels, and then the Marvels lose their other games. It might come down to a tiebreaker. It's hard to project exactly, but that's a possibility. Naturally, Upsetter would need to beat Prophet, and they would also need to win out and have Shoebox beat the champs. The champs also need to lose out, and I think that there would also be a tiebreaker, which they would need to win. But let's be honest, right? If you're sitting at 2-8, you need a lot of things to break your way.
Absolutely, yeah. But the scenario that you just spelled out, as far-fetched as it may seem, shows why no one should quit on their team. I think you need to continue to put out the best roster that you can. And if it requires running the table, then try to run the table. I've been in that position before, and it's daunting, but it's a challenge, and I love to see people continue to try as the season winds down.
And I have seen some real crazy things happen in fantasy leagues down the stretch, so you never know. Now, the Milwaukee Marvels and breaking out, I think that they probably, if they can win 2 games, will be in the playoffs. The Marvels are sitting at 4-6, fourth in their division, and breaking out is also at 4-6. So that is going to be a real interesting race in this division. I think that the 5, Project Freelancer and El Baracho, are fairly safe. In the West, Redemption will probably be good with 1 win, currently sitting at 6-4. But the Champs and Shoebox, who are at 5-5 and 4-6 respectively, I think if you're those teams, you're still probably hoping that you pick up 2 wins.
Oh, yeah. Yes, I think it'll definitely take 2 wins.
So now, something that we do need to talk about is we've mentioned Profit, and we're looking at the playoff projections. Profit was actually involved in 2 trades. That is clearly going to have ramifications. So the Profit traded to Redemption John Brown for Traquan Smith. I don't know if this is a huge trade that's really going to shake the balance of the league, but nonetheless, it is an interesting trade. You have Brown, a player that was pretty explosive early on. We haven't heard too much from now. And then you have Smith, a player that's in that high-powered New Orleans offense who always is a threat to have a big game.
Yeah, that trade is hard to evaluate because of the recent slump offensive slump for Baltimore. I would think that John Brown's floor is certainly higher than Traquan Smith. It's clear that Traquan Smith is not a guy who is guaranteed, really more than a couple or a few targets a week, and so obviously that could be an issue for rolling him out in seasonal leagues.
Absolutely. Now, another trade that the Profit was involved in, this one's an interesting trade. It's moving players that are on the same real-life team. So Shoebox gave up Randall Cobb to get Jamal Williams. As you spoke about Williams earlier, I think that you would have had to have liked this move, but it looks like since they've dumped Williams and he's now available.
Yeah, I mean, Cobb's been hurt, and when he's, I don't know, when he's been in, he hasn't been super usable. So, I feel like this trade was something of a wash, especially because Williams was dropped. But again, I think Williams should be rostered in 12-team leagues.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, as you mentioned, he's one of those players that's out there that has some potential that perhaps you won't get to harness, but if you do, will certainly help you. So before we close out this week's episode, I want to hear your top 3 teams for the rest of the season and who you predict as this league's winner.
Yes. So my top teams, I think it's hard to not go with the 2 division leaders, obviously, the Monster and El Baracho. Yep. I think both of those rosters, they look not only like high weekly floor rosters, but also deep rosters and lots of positional depth, which obviously is what we're going for. I actually went with Project Freelancer as the third team here. I just think that it has a lot of upside if injuries go right, and the players on that team have quite a few good matchups down the stretch here in November and then in December. So that just jumped out to me as a team that could make a push.
That's intriguing. Project Freelancers, I look at this roster, I can definitely see how that name would come to mind. As we mentioned, Dalvin Cook will be getting into the fold as well. For me, the 3 teams that I was most impressed with are the Monster, Cowboys, and El Baracho. It's hard to ignore the running back tandem in Gordon and Elliott that the Cowboys have. However, I have to say that when I look at the depth on this El Baracho squad, I think top to bottom, they have the balance of players that are needed and the depth to make a push to take the crown.
Definitely. And I also would like to just mention here, I see a lot of teams, including El Baracho, which has obviously an excellent roster, are rostering 2 quarterbacks. And that's certainly not necessary at this point in the season. like El Baracho, you're never going to start Alex Smith over Drew Brees. So, shore up, maybe pick up a running back handcuff or a receiver who could fall into some opportunity, and perhaps use that spot to look ahead and get a defense with a great matchup for not the coming week, but the following week. That's how I manage my teams. I just wanted to offer that advice.
Yeah, I love that advice too. And actually, what I will do even beyond that is on teams where I really believe I'm going to be in the semifinals or the finals, I start cutting the weight on my team, getting rid of players that are very unlikely to play and stocking up on the teams with the best matchups in those 2 weeks, because those are the single most important weeks, naturally, of the season.
Absolutely. And one more note on El Baracho. Yep. I don't see much reason to roster Martavis Bryant. I think you can cut him and look for, a running back. I know I've said Jamal Williams 50 times, but I'd much rather have Jamal Williams than Martavis Bryant.
Wow. So El Baracho, consider yourself lucky because you are getting some specialized advice there from Denny Carter. I can picture the rest of the league getting a little upset, although we have seen in the past that sometimes when Denny attaches himself to something, it can go south pretty quickly.
Yeah, I'm sorry. And the rich get richer here. This is not just. I'm sorry. Yeah.
Well, hey, thanks so much, Denny, for coming on, helping us break down the Fantasy 2018 One League. A very fun league. I think it's going to be really exciting and interesting to see how things finish. So thanks again, Denny.
Absolutely.
That will do it for this week's episode of the Fantasy 2018 One podcast, brought to you by FFBcast. For Denny Carter, I'm Dave Caban, saying thanks for tuning in and good luck for the rest of the season.
That concludes this episode. Follow us on Twitter at FFBcast and email your questions to ffbcast@gmail.com. See you next time for more fantasy greatness.